Sacred attention therapy is an approach to liberation. The first liberation is from the conditioned self, psychology of early life. The second liberation is from the realization of the true nature, the fulfillment of oneself as a personality. And the third liberation is the liberation into the life of spirituality and spiritual practice. Sacred attention therapy, or SAT, is a meta-psychology because it embraces not only the physical, emotional, mental and energetic aspects of the human being, but also the spiritual and the transcendental. Therefore, it is uniquely placed to be an applied psychology through counselling and psychotherapy in the 21st century, in which human beings are more complex than ever before.
Welcome to the first in a series of interviews with Richard Harvey, psychospiritual psychotherapist and spiritual teacher, to discuss the lecture series entitled Substantia. My name is Rob Meager. I'm an interfaith minister. I lead a spiritual ministry initiative in Ottawa, Canada called Spiritual Guidance, and I've been a student of Richard Harvey's work since 2012. Today's interview will discuss Substantia as a whole. Each subsequent interview in this interview series will explore in more detail each one of the lectures in Substantia. Substantia manuscripts are contained in an ebook entitled Bodhiocean, which is available through the Sacred Attention Therapy website. Bodhiocean is one of a trilogy of 3 ebooks, each containing 14 lectures, totaling 42 lectures. The first ebook is entitled Moksha Dawn, the second ebook is entitled Dharma Sky, and the third ebook, Bodhiocean. Again, all ebooks are available through the books page of the Sacred Attention Therapy website. You can also listen to the full recording of many of these lectures in this series on the lectures page of the Sacred Attention Therapy website. Lastly, you can view many other interviews on the videos page or on our YouTube channel. The URL for our website is www.sacredattentiontherapy.com, and on our website you can click on the YouTube channel icon to view our YouTube channel. And now a little bit of background about Richard Harvey. Richard is a psychospiritual psychotherapist and spiritual teacher. His work emerged out of the human potential movement of the 1970s. He trained with many teachers in humanistic and transpersonal approaches. He is the founder of Sacred Attention Therapy, a radical new approach to inner work for the 21st century that proposes a 3-stage model for human awakening. Richard is the author of Your Essential Self and The Flight of Consciousness, among many other publications. He works with people all around the world, and his forthcoming book to be published later this year is entitled Your Sacred Calling. And I'd now like to invite Richard Harvey to come on screen.
Thank you, Robert.
Welcome. Good to be with you.
I'm with you.
Just one point of clarification. I think I misstated how many titles actually were in the series. There's 6. That's right. Yes. Thanks for that opportunity. This being the introduction to this lecture series, Substantia, could we begin by talking a little bit about where you received the inspiration for the title of the series. What does Substantia mean?
Substantia had appeared as a title possibly before the previous set of talks, the Turnian talks, and even possibly around or before the Swan Sway lectures as well. It had just kind of appeared. It was as if I knew it somehow. And so, I do a lot of things backwards like this. I said, well, this is curious. What's this? And the background to it, although I won't recall all of the extraordinary detail, but it's a lot of fun to look into, is that Baruch Spinoza, Western philosopher, great philosopher, used the term substantia in a spiritual sense to mean essence. Now, the curious and wonderful thing about Baruch Spinoza is that early scholars of Vedic literature could hardly believe Baruch Spinoza wasn't familiar with the ancient Vedas, because so much of his philosophy seemed to be speaking about the divine realms in a very similar way to what we might call colloquially early Hinduism. Really the ancient Vedas, Bhagavad Gita, certainly the Upanishads, the Puranas, the ancient sutras, and so on and so on. And there is such a tremendous correlation between Spinoza's understanding of the spiritual and the ancient, which after all predated by 5 to 10 or more thousand years, the Vedic literature, that early Vedic scholars could hardly believe it. So that's fascinating in and of itself. And then it occurred to me that this wonderful story that we begin Substantia, the series with, which is an ancient Upanishad, speaks very much about essence. What is the essence of all things running through all matter is God. Is the very spiritual essence, and spiritual essence is substantia, hence the title.
For clarification perhaps, is the word substantia tied to any one tradition?
All I've got of it is what I've just told you. It was a word. It seems to me that Western philosophers in the last few hundred years took words in order, a little bit like we do as well with the philosopher and so on. If there isn't a word for it, you want something new to explain it, because after all, your experience may be preceded by the concept. So I think in using substantia, Spinoza was trying to say something which maybe there wasn't a sufficient terminology for.
There's 6 titles in the series. The following: Resistance to Freedom, Poor or Rich, a discussion of vision, I am responsible for myself, I am responsible for you is the 3rd title. Wherefore art thou? The God who has forsaken me blesses me also is number 4. Arriving at truth is the penultimate lecture. And then finally, a spiritual autobiography. What would you like to tell us about each of these lectures?
What I'd like to tell you about each of these lecture titles is everybody warned me off them and said they're appalling. They're just... I mean, I remember a night with some friends and saying, you can't call a lecture, what is it, Wherefore art thou...
The God who has forsaken me blesses me also.
It's just too long, there's too much sentences involved, and I took it quite seriously. I thought they're absolutely right. These are diabolical titles, really, and obviously you just shorten them and everything, but I couldn't do it. It just wouldn't happen. I mean, we've talked before in these interviews about where and how I write these things, and in the end, I absolve myself of all responsibility to some degree. But I found the what would you call it? The sort of avalanche of these titles very charming, actually, because I didn't tell you this. The titles came before anything. That's right. Substantia came, and then 6 titles came, and then I had to write whatever the titles were about. So, which is very much, again, upside down. I mean, you don't do that in writing. I don't think most of the time I tend to do that in writing, or maybe I have in these lectures to some degree, but usually you write the first bit last, obviously, and really the very first bit, of course, is the title. So, wait. And even when you take a book, usually to the publishers, they propose these other titles. So, Your Essential Self was never called that, and Flight of Consciousness actually was called that. But it seems to me very often publishers will haggle about the title and give you a better idea as they see it anyway. In the case of these talks, the whole body of these verbose titles came, and then I had to write whatever they implied, really. That's how it worked.
I remember reading them, and that is the lectures, and the resistance to freedom just speaking so deeply to what I think for many seekers is that ultimate point they arrive at of freeing themselves. Poor or Rich, A Discussion of Vision was a very interesting take on this idea of wealth, versus poor. I'm responsible for myself, and I'm responsible for you. Definitely the invitation into a non-dualistic way of exploring the world. Wherefore art thou, the God who has forsaken me, blesses me also. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was definitely some analogies to biblical and other passages and metaphor in there. Arriving at
Shakespeare meets the Gospels.
There we go. Arriving at truth, again, that wonderful penultimate, we might say, stage one arrives. And then there was that interesting title, that kind of captured a spiritual autobiography, which may not be what people think it's about.
It wasn't what I thought it was about either.
Can you speak a little bit about the last title, The Spiritual Autobiography?
It was the most daunting title, because as I said, I wrote them all, they all came in an avalanche and a very charming amount of inspiration. I then, by the way, made copious notes on each one of these, none of which have anything to do with the final talks. I mean, of all of the series that we've discussed, which I think it's taken 3 years to do all these 42 lectures, this was the most eccentric and charming. I'm not going to use the word channeling because I didn't like it, but guided writing. It really was. It was like playing, and it was like being with children, or it was being very light and being on the beach or something. That's what it was like. So having made these copious notes, which I still got to this day, and thinking now I know what these are about, when I started to write, it went off on a completely different avenue, you see. And a spiritual biography was very daunting and weird because, as I may have mentioned to you before in these interviews, when I started writing in earnest, should we say, in any way seriously, whenever that was back at the beginning of the millennium or something, my influences, if I had any, were probably Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, and almost certainly Nisargadatta, who I was entrenched in, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, a non-dualist teacher. And both would completely eschew anything to do with biography or personal detail. It's very hard to know much about Nisargadatta's life because he wasn't interested, you see. And he was a big influence on me in the turn of the millennium. And I got someone to bring me all his books from San Francisco, and I was looking at them and I said, these are wonderful. And I aspired to that. So it was very difficult for me in Flight of Consciousness and then later books, and people said, we want to hear these stories and we want to hear about your life, because I'd sort of put it away. I've still largely put it away. I mean, I don't find it overly interesting. And when we get into the true sacred spiritual practices of perpetual sadhana and so on, which we've touched on in these talks, certainly, being interested in how you got there is rather like, as I say, worshipping the road when you've arrived at destination. I mean, that the road was for a purpose, and it's you there. And so biographical detail has a place, but it's a process. It's a process of getting you to the place of truth that you discarded. So Nisargadatta didn't talk about himself. Lao Tzu wouldn't talk about himself. We're not even sure if he's a person. That's a degree to which he or they or whoever didn't talk about themselves. And so it was very daunting to have a title, a spiritual biography, and very relieving as I started to write it, to realize I wasn't having to talk overly anyway about my own journey. As I recall. I think that's right. Hopefully. Yeah.
Now, I asked this next question when we had the interview about the introduction about the previous lecture series, which was the Turnian Talks. But I'm going to ask it again here, because I feel anyway, since it's significant. So earlier lecture series, going back to the Novena teachings and the like, they tended to focus on matters that resonated or emanated from the first stage of your three-stage model of human awakening, the journey of self-discovery. But this lecture series, like the previous, the Turnian Talks, feels more as if it touches on the second and third stages of awakening in your three-stage model of human awakening. Is this the case? And if so, was it intentional?
It is the case. I would remind us also that in the final talk of all 42 lectures, we even have a little piece on the fourth stage of awakening. Right. So absolutely, we go the whole way through and on. All I can say is, I mean, I don't like to say this had nothing to do with me, but it was sitting out in the rain, these 6 talks. It was just like sitting out in the rain. It all just fell on me. I wrote it down. I wrote it all down again. I then sort of refined it and made it, some grammar and some spelling and whatnot. But I'm as interested and fascinating in it as maybe you are or other people are. I think that it had a feeling of I definitely had a feeling that 42 talks was enough for now. 3 years was enough talking somehow. And I definitely had a feeling that there was a rush of the need to declare things that hadn't been spoken about to now. So if we have 6 here, what's that? 36 down and 6 go makes 42. And it was a feeling of you have to say, or at least allude to, because as strange though it sounds, even in 42 lectures and this 3 books, and they really are book length of talking, it's still summary. It's still summary. I mean, I felt that Novena teachings, and I've talked about the Novena to so many people since then who've been impressed by them or who've used them, because it's so generic, love, anger, devotion. So they mean a lot to people who are grappling with relationships, forgiveness, whatever these big themes are. That somehow the things that hadn't been uttered need to come into these last 6. They just all needed to come in, even if it was thin, even if it was summary. So at least it would have been said. At least it would have been alluded to. Feeling, if anything, that the 42 lectures was some kind of completed form. Still summary, but somehow complete. There's a completion about them in these last 6, I think.
You've intuited my next question, which I'll invite to close our interview for today. There is a feeling of summation, synthesis, almost finality with these talks. Am I being overly sensitive to this being the last series? Or am I intuiting some intention with this series?
I think that what's happened, as you know, in the chronologically, is we've moved into more spontaneity, if anything. The satsang meetings, in a sense, have replaced the lectures we used to have. Were they fortnightly? I can't. Maybe they were fortnightly lectures,
Yes.
which is what we've been interviewing about now, more or less fortnightly for a fairly long time. We're coming towards the end of this series of interviews about the talks, which took 3 years, I think.
Yeah.
And now we started into something new, which is spontaneous meetings in truth, where I talk, we have questions, you and I conduct a spiritual meeting of sorts, and this seems to be what's replaced them. So that's what it's yielded to. So I think there is a finality. I think that's right. And I think one does only so much talking, bearing in mind that we're not interested in religion, are we? We're not interested in dogma as such. You see, we're not interested in a book that says this is how to do it. We're interested in the living truth, which is spontaneous and may even contradict itself. So in a sense, by definition, it has to be spontaneous, unpredictable, immediate response, and so on. The talks address that. The talks partially did that in the way in which they were prepared or created, delivered to some degree. And they have yielded the new approach, which is satsang meetings. So yes, a kind of finality. And in my lineage, as I see it, there is definitely a movement into silence from spontaneous spiritual discourse, which isn't a reversion or an ambivalence or a contradiction or anything of that sort. It is simply depth that you reach is in the spiritual silence that really is there the whole time you're talking or reading it, between the words, between the pages, between the moments. But eventually that silence presides, and no words are enough, of course.
And words aren't necessary.
Words are necessary, yeah.
A beautiful place to end this introduction to the Substantia series, and when we come together the next time, we'll begin looking at them one by one, and the first one will be resistance to freedom.
Wonderful.
Until then, Richard.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.